Yeah, so far we've raised about $150 million, but it's that $100,000 I got for Long Beach Blast that allowed us to, move schools, add another school is among the most meaningful, even though it's not necessarily among the biggest. So working with organizations to stabilize what they do in a way, so that they can spend less time on this really complicated and difficult task and spend more time um, working on things that matter, working with programs like that.
You're listening to America's Healthiest City on Mike King Biz Radio Network on ESPN Richmond 106.1 and Choice 105.3. Welcome to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. Today on the show, I have Matt Leighty, the Chief Strategy Officer of Grant Flow, and we're going to talk about the impact of grant writing on nonprofits in our community and beyond, as well as the impacts of a changing technological world. But before we get started, if you are new to this program, please check out americashealthiestcity.com to learn about our 10-year community partnership to make the entire region the healthiest in America by 2033. We cannot do this alone. We need to involve everybody. So if you represent a nonprofit, a for-profit, a government agency, or an academic institution, and you want to get involved in this, please check out what it takes to become an ambassador. It is totally free, and you can help us with this cause. Without further ado, Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. I'm excited to talk with you on air because you and I have had great conversation offline, and I'm just really fascinated to learn about the work that you've done and the impact that you've had. So I'll start with the same question I ask everybody for this show. And I know the answer, but I want our audience to know,
Sure.
Are you native to the area, or did you move here at some point? And if so, what brought you?
I am from Richmond, Virginia. So I grew up in the West End in Henrico County. I did about 11 years away, but I came home again.
I have attempted to introduce you to a number of people in the community who I thought needed to know you, and I've been disappointed that most of them know you already, so I haven't been able to do that.
Half of what they say is true.
So let's talk about just briefly your work. Grant Flow is a new organization, about a year old, but prior to that, Leighty and Associates.
Leighty and
right?
Associates, yeah. So we made the transition from Leighty and Associates into Grant Flow over the last year, just to allow us to continue to grow and take on more people and address kind of what we see as a major sticking point with a lot of nonprofits, which is we need somebody to help us write these grants.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit from there and talk about what got you into this industry. So you're connected in the community. You understand some of its problems. What brings you to the point of saying, I need to go and become a grant writer?
Sure. It's pretty easy. I had a job, and my boss said that if I would like to keep that job, I needed to write the grant. And that was how I paid for myself. And that was a lot of other grant writers have had that experience. And then once you get good at getting grants, people really don't want you to do other stuff. And I found that it was a wonderful way for me to continue learning about different subject matters and areas. I've always been interested in a lot of different things, but there's not a job that pays you to learn. Well, there is in grant writing. You get to work with animal shelters and, health and human services and education and all sorts of different stuff. So what's interesting to me about it is always learning something new, working with somebody innovative. That's what kept us going.
So you've been in the space for a while. You were at UVA, you went to Pepperdine.
Mm-hmm.
Got into grant writing at Pepperdine?
At Pepperdine, yeah.
Okay.
I was a director on a study of probation and parole reform in the U.S., and we had to get a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant to do that work. And then I went to UCLA, and I wrote grants there for several years. And then I went and started Leighty and Associates, hung out a shingle, and went out into the world of nonprofit grant writing, which is a lot different than university research grant writing. The way I typically talk about grant writing is that it's a lot like track and field. People can say I'm a track and field athlete, but a javelin thrower is way different than a 2-miler, is different than a sprinter. So under the umbrella of grants, there's a lot of different events with specialties and technicalities. What we are at Grant Flow is we're decathletes. We're pretty good at a lot of the different events, but we also know um, when we identify something, we might say we really need a shot putter for this, right? Somebody who's dedicated their life to just that area.
Great, great. So you start out in the academic space. You open up the menu
Mm-hmm.
to include other organizations. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of those early nonprofits outside of the academic space that really told you that this is where you need to be, you need to go further into this?
Sure. My very first client that hired me to work with them when I hung out a shingle was an organization called Long Beach Blast, and they do two programs. One is for elementary school students, and one is for high school students in Long Beach, California, which is where I was at the time. That was during my sojourn. Um, and we got a grant that allowed them to expand their high school program to another high school. And that meant about 30 to 40 kids a year, based on our numbers, who would have dropped out of high school didn't. And I was addicted to that kind of impact, right? Being able to see what happened really take place. And that sort of has been what's driven me forward.
Well, it sounds like a great quality to have in a grant writer that you're hiring or acquiring. It's not just the money; it's the impact, and if you can understand that, then you strive for more money. I can imagine.
Yeah, it's grants are a lot about math, grant math, and showing the impact of the organization to funders or potential funders. And a lot of people come to me and I say, like, what's your goal for next year? And they're like, to raise $1.5 million. And that's the wrong order. So we work with our clients to figure out, no, what is your goal in terms of how many schools are you going to serve, or how many trees are you going to plant? Those sorts of things. And then we build backwards to figure out what it's going to take to get them there. And then we go help find the money to do that.
So, tell me a little bit about some other nonprofits that you've been able to secure wins for, and I imagine that there have been some pretty big things that you've been able to impact.
Yeah, so far we've raised about $150 million, but it's that $100,000 I got for Long Beach Blast that allowed us to move schools, add another school, is among the most meaningful, even though it's not necessarily among the biggest. So working with organizations to stabilize what they do in a way, so that they can spend less time on this really complicated and difficult task and spend more time working on things that matter, working with programs like that. We're working right now with the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, which is just doing a lot of great work around affordable housing with an innovative model in the city. And they're a fun one to work with, and they're doing a lot of good. But we've worked with many others.
You're listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. Today we are in the studio with Matt Leighty from Grant Flow, and we're talking about the money that's needed to make important things happen, both here in our community and beyond. So I'm really fascinated by your growth. I understand that prior to Grant Flow, you were already very successful, but really in the last 18 months or so, with Grant Flow, maybe not even that long, you've been able to do so much more. Talk a little bit about the transition from Leighty and Associates to Grant Flow. What changed? What are you doing now that's enabling you to have this newfound success?
Sure. Over the 10 years I was doing Leighty and Associates, I developed a methodology and approach to grants, and the whole thought process behind it was um, sort of a frustration with the difficulties and complexities of the grant process. And the nonprofits that I work with tend to take like a tree approach to grants and see each grant as an individual tree and target that way. But having gained experience across a lot of nonprofits, we take sort of a forest approach. And by preparing in advance and getting together a lot of the relevant materials, budgets, information, and standardizing that, it allows us to do more work and get more out the door. Grant writer is kind of a funny name because about 85% of the job is actually just getting the materials that you need to then write the grant. So the approach was to go gather all those materials in advance, to stop farming and start cooking. And when you have a good reservoir of ingredients to cook with, it makes getting grants out the door a lot easier. But the other thing that we saw is that nonprofits typically store a lot of sensitive grant information, not sensitive like whatever, but very important grant information in Google Sheets or Excel documents, because there's nothing out there that really tracks and keeps pace with when things are due, when reports are due, histories like that. So GrantFlow is the software program that we've built that is a CRM built exclusively around grants. It's different from other CRMs. It's an institution to institution metric. But having that clear work plan, as well as the ingredients that we need to write the grants, allows us to, instead of writing one grant, write 3 grants.
So you work a little bit differently with your clients under this model than you would typically. You kind of have more of a subscription service. You're working with them over a longer period of time. Or
That's right. We basically replace a full-time grant writer, and we take over in all of the grant needs, right? And so we're able to reduce for some of the clients. They might have been spending 10 to 15 hours a week on grants, and now they're spending 1 to 2 hours every other week. And that frees them up to do stuff that we can't do. We can write the grants, but we can't go have cups of coffee with potential donors. We can't work on the program. We're not experts in everything. We're experts in grants. And so by taking some of that administrative and task burden off their shoulders, they're able to do the things that are really important.
so it sounds like sort of the new model, if you will, and you before the program we were talking about how you see your business changing a decent amount in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
You've innovated the way that grants are applied for, written, organized, and that completely revolutionizes. You've made it more efficient. They're spending less time, but they're getting more success from their applications as well. How does that organization lend itself to a higher rate of success on application?
Well, you might not actually get a higher rate of success on the applications, but if you have more applications, if you get the same rate of success, you get a higher return. A lot of it is like Moneyball, the movie or the book, where it's just getting on base. You don't get grants that you don't apply for. So applying for more grants means that you should get more grants, as long as they're well done. And so focusing first on making sure that we have a really high quality thing there, but treating grants as a unified communication strategy rather than just a one-off thing that you're doing to each foundation. Really focusing in and making sure that we're conveying the same information in the same way to different people and audiences.
I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody else that serves the nonprofit world, not on the grant side, and the conversation centered somewhat around the lack of maturity, business maturity in the nonprofit space.
Sure.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And then, as you think about the advancement that you've been able to bring to your clients through organizing this information and making it easier to apply for grants, what is one or two, sort of best practices that you see void from, the nonprofit community that you would like to see injected and really focused on as an improvement?
Sure. I think grants are different, or grants. Nonprofits are businesses, right? But they're different than businesses in that if you sell water, your customer is your client. They're the same thing. Nonprofits, the clients are distinct from the customers. So if you run a homeless services nonprofit, your clients are homeless individuals that you serve. Your customers are the people who pay you to serve them, right? Out in nonprofit land, unfortunately, there are people who are great at customer service who aren't necessarily good at client service. And what we look for is people who are very good at client services, and we try to help them improve their customer service, right? Appealing to different foundations, funders, donors in that way. And so it's a challenge for them because most people got into nonprofits to be centered on client service. And it's a different skill set to have the customer service stuff. That's where development professionals and nonprofits, who we work very closely with, are so key, and they're so valuable to any nonprofit, is having somebody who is very good at the customer service aspect of the business. And that's where you see the most successful nonprofits. The things I wish most people knew about grants is that they're not there to save you. A lot of people come to me And this is the perfect grant for us, right? And if your entire business strategy hinges on the success of this one grant, you don't have a very successful business strategy. Um, Grants are kind of like movies and movie stars. You get paid on your past performance, right? So if you're thinking about going for $1.5 million grant, what do you have behind you that shows that you'll be successful on that large of a grant? If it's nothing, you're not in a good place to do that. If you have a good track record with other stuff, yeah, they might make that investment in you and help you go on and expect more on the next time. So it's really that they're not there to save you; they're there to help you move along.
Do you think that at any stage a nonprofit could be ready for a grant, or do you think that there's kind of that baseline foundation that needs to be established before it's time?
If other people aren't investing you and trusting you with their money and your impact, why would a foundation do that? They look for safe bets. So I typically say, you need to have, $250,000 a year and other sources of revenue before you're ready for a grant strategy, right? To pursue grants as a whole. That doesn't mean you might not try like a one-off grant here or there that is right for you as an organization. But what we do is build grant programs where we're going to do nothing but write grants. And so you need to have enough of a track record and understanding and clear goals and metrics and like that behind you before pursuing something like that would really make sense.
So for the folks that have come to you, maybe even before grant flow and are pursuing this approach, what's the world look like for them, prior to having this grant program in place, and after having this program in place? I understand, it frees up time inside the organization, but what other
Mm-hmm.
sorts of things happen on the maturity side of these organizations?
Um, I think the main thing is that they're able to spend their time. It builds their capacity so they can do other things other than write grants. Now, a lot of them had to do that on top of their regular jobs, and so they're working a full day, going to soccer practice, and then they're up till midnight trying to submit this grant right before the deadline, right? And we're trying to eliminate that for them so they have a real clear and sustained approach to what they are doing, and they understand what's going on without having to be involved in the day-to-day operations of that. What it looks like in an organization and it's really flowing for is that development director whose job was to build relationships in the community and write the grants has more time to build relationships in the community. The executive director can be attending to programs more regularly, building new partnerships with other people. So we're freeing them up to do the things that they're really good at and skilled at and desire to do. And we're focusing on the parts that we're good at, and it works really well together. I feel like immensely fortunate that there are all these people out there in the community doing this work. Like the idea of working with middle school kids is horrifying to me, right? Like I would never want to do that. But there's people who are really good at doing that. And I think it's really unfair to say, you're really good at that. Also, 30% of your time you need to lock yourself away in an office and type out these forms and, submit all these grants. That's not a good use of their time and their energy, and they could be spending more time with the kids that they're doing a good job with.
You're listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1 FM. You can catch this show each week on Thursdays at 6 a.m. here on the network or on espnrichmond.com. If you enjoy this conversation, please hop over to YouTube and follow us at America's Healthiest City and catch clips on Instagram, also at America's Healthiest City. Today in the studio, we have Matt Leighty from Grant Flow, and we're talking about how we can empower nonprofit organizations in our community to do better work and raise more money for the important causes that enable us to be a healthier community. I want to take the few minutes that we have left and pivot our conversation a little bit more toward the community. And maybe if you could start us off with some ideas that you might share. I know that you're very passionate about community and politics and just the solutions that are needed to move us forward. What are some ideas that we might add to the ideas board from your point of view that will help us achieve this goal?
I think there's a lot of people out there who come up with an idea or a cause or a project that they think is really important to the community, and they go full forward on that idea or project or cause. without maybe checking around and doing some background work and realizing that there's already people here working on that issue and that they might be better served by joining forces. Duplicating efforts across every little place in town, um, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. Sometimes the locality needs a specific approach, and sometimes things can be better accomplished through partnership. So if you're out there and you're thinking, I really want to do something about education, there are other people there who are working on that and might have some more formalized things that you can tap into that can help you stop spinning your wheels and actually like let the rubber meet the road. Mm-hmm. Did I just mix analogies there, or is that appropriate?
Makes sense.
But it allows you to, the time, your time is precious, so spend it on something of meaning, and spending your time just spinning your gears isn't that. So there's other people to tap into who can help you, support you, and also might have, programs or resources there in existence.
I can imagine from the grant writing perspective, even if somebody is successful at raising some money and getting to, say, that $250,000 level, it becomes harder to raise grant funds when some other entity is competing for those same dollars that's doing, essentially the same work.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with all the specifics of it, but you can take Feed More as an example, where there were many different area food banks, and funders got kind of tired of supporting lots of different food banks, and then they took the effort to sort of combine themselves into one sort of centered area, and that's just what I'm talking about.
And I can cite an example of the opposite in the housing space, where it's requirement of HUD to have a continuum of care where all the nonprofits work together.
Correct.
Yeah. So, what other thoughts, might you share, or insights from your interests are you interested in, or maybe another thing that we can explore, or some folks in the community that we can bring into the studio to continue the conversation?
Sure. I've gotten a chance to work with Chris Frelke, the director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities, a few times over the year. And I sat on the Parks board for a little bit. And he is just such a fantastic resource for the city. I know many people who just think, well, Frelke can get that done. And he goes a little bit under the radar, and I don't think he always gets the recognition that he deserves. Another, I already mentioned, Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, but their chief operating officer, Lark Washington, has just been a real pleasure to work with. And the work they're doing around housing, I think, is very important at this moment.
And we've got a couple minutes left, but before we go, can you tell the listeners, who is the ideal client for you? Who are you looking for to contact you, and who do you think you can best help?
Sure. In nonprofit fundraising, there's sort of these broad buckets around corporate social responsibility, education, health and human services, arts, environment, those typical things. If you have programs that serve people that have measurable results, grants are probably for you. And that is sort of our ideal client, but we don't discriminate against type. So we work with animal shelters, housing, education, workforce, disability services, any of those. So grants are really built to support secular programs, and I don't mean like non-religious. It's like steady and slowly increasing. So if you have a good base and you're doing good work, you have the numbers to prove it. Grants are there to kind of help you get further and increase your capacity to do more around that. And those are my ideal clients. I will say I do not want another inquiry about a documentary film grant.
A tough one, huh? Or
very
hard
tough.
To find. Yeah.
I will say that the arts in general, I really love them. My wife is an artist, and if anybody out there is in the art space and feeling like grants are really tough, you're not wrong. I stopped doing it. I'm pretty good at it, because the art space is a really, really tough place to operate in.
Well, it's good to know. And I think starving artists have been learning that lesson over and over and over again throughout their lifetime for generations.
And I'm here to validate them. They're not wrong on that.
Well, something to work on. I was in an earlier interview with Catherine Blessing from the VMFA. Mm-hmm. We were talking about the metrics that we've identified, about 25 different metrics across 8 different categories, largely centered around the social determinants of health. Mm-hmm. And she said, creativity is not in there, art's not in there. It should be. It's focused on mental health. And it really caused me to pause and say, we need to think a lot about creativity as a solution to some of the problems that we face.
I agree.
I want to let you have the opportunity to let folks at home know how they can get in touch with you.
Sure, www.grantflow.com. There is a W on flow. I'm not that Silicon Valley type, but that's it. And you can email me, matt@grantflow.com.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you joining me in the studio today. This was a great interview. I can keep going if we had more time. So I can't wait to hear what you do in the year ahead.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. This was America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. Catch us next week at 6 a.m. here on the network, and follow us on socials. We'll catch you next time.